Welcome everybody to Lean BYTES. Those of you who are new to Lean BYTES, because I know we have some external people as well. Lean BYTES is something we do every 2 weeks where somebody talks about a topic, usually technical, for 16 minutes. So be on the lookout for future Lean BYTES. I know our next one is with Alex McClure on how prototyping tools speed up development and reduces meetings. So today we got Tim Gifford talking about coding standards. So I'll turn it over to Tim.
Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for everybody for joining. Today we're going to talk a little bit about, well, a little bite about coding standards as a habit. And all I have to, oh, there we go. So on the agenda for today, the quickest 15 minutes in technology. We're going to start talking about some of the problems with coding standards. The power of habits. We'll talk a little bit about atomic habits in James Clear's book. And then kind of getting into the system on how to turn coding standards into a habit on your team. We're going to make it easy. We're going to attempt to make it obvious, and there will be some opinions in there, my opinions. And then we'll kind of review overall what that system for habit change looks like as it relates to coding standards. So we've all probably used coding standards in the past, or I should say we've all had coding standards in the past. Whether or not we use them is a different story. In my experience, I've noticed that they're too long. They're too detailed. There's a lot of different pieces of information. They aren't memorable, probably because they're too long or they're too detailed. They're generally hard to find. They're not stored in the team area. They're not on the in the source control system. They're just out somewhere on a wiki that somebody at some point put out there because they thought they needed to have them. And so ultimately, it turns into a problem that they're not ever used by the team. So I was always frustrated by that. And so I'd been reading this book, Atomic Habits. If you haven't read it, you should. I'm a big James Clear fan, the author. He talks about habits. Once you have a habit, it becomes automatic. And so once you create these habits, you don't have to mentally think about them anymore. It just becomes something that you do naturally. The other thing he talks about is a lot of times people think about goals as they relate to habits. And he's more interested in creating a system than a goal. So I was at a Lean Coffee last week, and one of the gentlemen I was talking to mentioned how he has a system where he requires himself to work out for 1 minute a day at the gym. And so that 1 minute a day system requires him to actually go to the gym. And likely he's going to work out for 1 minute, more than 1 minute, but the 1 minute system that he has in place actually gets him to the gym to start that habit. And so James Clear talks about you're not going to rise the level of the goals. You're going to fall to the level of your system. So put systems in place in order to make your goals achievable. And then the other thing that's really important is once you have these habits, they have compounding interest. So a little bit of a change today will result in a lot larger change in the future. And hopefully your retirement accounts are doing something similar. So a couple things that we want to talk about. Let's make it easy. Let's make it obvious. And then finally, we'll review for the system of habit change. So first of all, let's make it easy. So one of the things that James Clear talks about is that the environment actually is better than your motivation. So as it relates to coding standards, I will generally put the coding standards, and this was back when we all worked in the same space, we'd put them up somewhere visible so that they were available for people to review. Either that's on your daily task board, your Scrum board, or in your cube area, or maybe in the virtual world, it's on a Miro board, somewhere that the team works in frequently. The other thing to make it easy is we want to automate as many of those standards as possible. If somebody has to manually go through these things, there's a couple problems with that. One, it takes some time. Two, it's petty. A lot of petty conversations happen from that. And three, it makes people feel dumb. So if you happen to share code that has formatting problems, it makes you not feel so smart because you shared something that isn't correct. And so anything that we can push those standards down using linting tools or anything else, so that it happens before you push changes up to be shared with other people, it not only helps you look like a better coder, but it helps reinforce the habit, right? You get quick feedback. It happens every time you commit or every time that you're making it, you're doing a build. And so those things help reinforce that those things are important. So that's the way I try to make it easy for teams. Now, make it obvious. This is where we're going to go through some of the an example coding standard that I've created for mainly C# and Java. And like I said before, these I try to fit because the coding standards, when they're too long, nobody reads them, nobody uses them. We're going to try to fit those on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Now, of course, in the virtual world, we might have some flexibility there, but generally shorter is better. And I'll talk about what we need to do later about if you have more than something that will fit on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. All right, so we're going to walk through these. I've got about 5 slides of these. If Lean BYTES were longer, we could get into profound discussions around why these make sense and why they don't. These are quite opinionated. And if you'd like to have more conversation, I am open to doing that after Lean BYTES. But we'll kind of walk through these. I'll maybe make a couple notes as we go through. First of all, no duplication. The don't repeat yourself, the dry principle is in full effect. We all know that the pains that occur when we repeat ourselves and when we have duplication, it makes things hard to change. I like traceability, so every commit message that we have should have a ticket number so that we can quickly identify the changes that are in the code base to the work that was requested by the business folks, our stakeholders. I am also a big proponent of no commented out code. If you're going to comment it out, you might as well delete it. You have source code there to revert it back if you need it, but it just tends to keep things ugly. It doesn't look as professional. It's not as clean. So just, clean out your garage every spring. You should also comment all your, remove all your commented code. Now, the next one, methods have 10 or fewer lines, also including test methods. That 10, just a number, right? I found that if it's too small, it's hard. People argue a lot with me. If I make it too large, then I think the code just gets a little unruly. So I've just picked 10. Now, if it gets to be 12, probably not going to freak out. If it's fewer than 10, that's always good. So pick a number that makes the methods as simple as possible and doesn't spend all your time arguing with your team. Methods and constructors have three or fewer parameters. The reason this one's here is so that we can, if there's more than 3 parameters, I found that there's generally a missing abstraction. You need a class or something else to go into that, that other class on that constructor. Classes have 7 or fewer public methods. This is related to single responsibility. Your classes, if they have more than 7, tend to be doing more than one thing. All right. No method calls or logic in constructors. If you're test driven like myself or aspire to be, if you try to new something up and it does things, it makes it very difficult to test. We want those to be very simple. This one's Java specific, checked exceptions. They tend to bleed and cascade across the entire system. That can get really irritating when you're doing refactorings. Classes are named using a noun or a noun phrase. We should know this all the way back from when we first took programming classes. That's kind of the reason of object-oriented programming is classes are generally nouns. And then your methods, the thing that your classes do, should be verbs. So keep that in mind when you're naming things. Names make things a lot easier to maintain and to understand. And along with understanding variables, don't use really small names for variables if their scope is large. If their scope is small, you can use a small variable name. And generally, I want those to be pronounceable. Don't try to do what I've seen a lot of databases where they remove all the vowels. Only one level of abstraction. Keep things simple. This one's controversial. No impls at the end of your implementation classes. We can get into that later. No getters and setters, no constants, and no public constants. Basically, don't have state in a part of your interfaces. Interfaces should be a part of your classes. They shouldn't leak abstractions. Constants, when you make them public, they generally start to leak across your entire system. And then some testing ones. I see a lot of tests that have assert not null. That's pretty boring. Hopefully you've got something more interesting to test against. Try to reduce or eliminate all the add ignore tests. Like if you're going to ignore them, either fix them or delete them. This is kind of like a commented out code. 3 or fewer assertions per test method, so that we're not doing too many things within our tests. We keep our test methods small. No mocked static methods. That's going to require you to do some wrapping, but it also, in my experience, has helped the overall design of the system. No uncovered lines. I'm not a huge proponent of 100% code coverage, but try to keep your lines covered with tests. And then state-based testing over interaction-based testing. So also to say, like, prefer stubs over mocks. We can talk probably deeper about that at some point, but I found that interaction-based testing is hard for people to understand, but it is necessary sometimes. Just prefer state-based testing because it makes things a little easier. Pure functions are easier to test than non-pure functions. All right, so when we're going through and we're trying to create a system to get these code standards as a part of our team, the first thing I like to do is get things set up. So go through, have a meeting with your team, come up with a few of those standards that you want to focus on. Make sure they fit on a single piece of paper. Automate any of the formatting stuff. Anything that you can automate, and then you don't have to put it on the piece of the paper, because you don't have to focus on it because the automation has already taken care of it. It's kind of the prefer automation over documentation rule. And then what I like to do is some cadence, I'm going to say quarterly here, is that we're going to review the posted standards that we have, and anything that's already become a habit that we just naturally do and we haven't been catching ourselves, or we don't need to focus on it, those things tend to be invisible. They don't need to be up there anymore. So remove them. And then find some other standard, maybe a next level standard that the team really needs to focus on to improve their behaviors on the team, right? So anything that's easy, let's remove it, and let's move things that need focus, because things that are intrinsic or invisible, and we don't have to focus on them anymore. And so that's kind of that last step, is continually improve those standards. And you may say that they aren't necessarily a standard if they're continually changing. But for me, I think the habit actually improves the code base over a longer time period than just having a straight up public standard, published standard. All right, and I have just under 2 minutes left. I like to say, let's open it for questions. If anybody has, maybe let's not do questions, but let's make some comments. If we can make comments within the next minute or so, and then we'll pass it back to Scott and he will wrap up.
I hope with an actual wrap.
I do not have a wrap, Andy. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Max. Do you have one?
No, I came wanting the show.
Oh, okay.
Were there any comments that we wanted to review? Wasn't of course taking a look at those, or are they just random?
I have a comment that's not really even a question, or just a comment that I think a lot of these coding standards differ by language. I mean, everyone, that's kind of obvious, but I think like more so than I thought.
Very true, Luke. And that's why I think it's important to like kind of review those. We do working agreements with a lot of our teams to just make sure we understand kind of what the code should look like. If you want to argue over tabs and spaces, that's the time to do it. And then if you disagree, at least commit with your team like what your focus is going to be. And hopefully you can automate some of the tabs and spaces things away, so you don't have to actually.
Yeah, automate the bot that kicks them into the Sparta hole if they say spaces.
Yes.
We got to word tabs. So I guess here's a question. Are coding standards more industry-based or are they more company-based? What do
I
you
think
say?
you have both, and that's a good point too, Sean. I generally like, if the team really doesn't have any place to start, like you can use a published standard. They're already out there. There's tools that already have kind of some formatting rules already baked in. Start with those, and then because the industry has kind of figured out what these things need to look like. And one thing, and I know I'm over time, that I look for in a code base is when you look at the code, you shouldn't be able to tell who wrote it. It should all look like the same person was, even if it's a team of people or we're working on the same code, and it should all be like fairly consistent and straightforward.
Okay.
So thanks everybody for coming. I will turn it over to Scott.
Yeah, well, I don't have anything else. Thanks, Tim, for that. And I guess the only thing to mention again is here in 2 weeks, we'll have another one of these, and Alex McClure is going to be talking about how prototyping tools speeds up development and reduces meetings. So you can expect to get a feedback form after this. So keep on the lookout for that. Otherwise, have a good Thanksgiving, everybody, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.